Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, co-host. And Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Do you know what day today is?
Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday. And, you know, as many as elections I can remember, the elections have always been said the most important election in the history of the country. And, of course, this is the most important election ever. At least for this year, it's the most important election. But today is the most important event of the election of this whole year because it's Super Tuesday, a lot of votes up. But, you know, if you really dissect those numbers out, it isn't quite as dramatic as they claim. You know, there's too many of those super delegates and too much goes on at conventions. So there's a lot of room. But anyway, the perceptions are that this is a very, very big day. But let's assume and give them a little bit of credibility that a lot is going to be decided today. But I've sort of come to the point of thinking that about all they're going to do, if it does have an effect, is picking a new boss. You know, and then the new boss just replaces the old boss. And I claim that either side, they're just picking a boss. It's a different description of the boss, whether it's a Hillary or a Trump. But there's still going to be a boss with the absence of any serious consideration, you know, with any of the very important issues.
And even with the Sanders as a new boss, the boss is going to take more of your money and do with it things that you don't like, and there's no way around it.
And but when it comes to issues, most people say, "Well, what are you guys talking about? How can Hillary be anywhere like Trump?" Well, in many ways, perception-wise, different. Like she's a woman and he's a man. You know, that's a difference.
That is different, yeah.
But what about foreign policy? I can't think of any major things. It's the way maybe things are to be handled, but even that is not a whole lot different. She's such a neocon and she's pro-war. Trump, we're not exactly sure of, but he's part of the crowd that says, boy, if I'm president, or no, when I'm president, I am going to rebuild our military. You know, the military's been torn down, so he's part of that. And he uses language very often where he talks about, oh yeah, we'll bomb him and do this. And so I don't think foreign policy would change.
It doesn't seem like, I mean, he has made some encouraging sounds. I like the fact that he said Bush was a liar when it comes to Iraq. I think that was great. But then, you know, it did sound good that he wouldn't go into Libya or Syria. But then he says he'd tear up the Iran deal and go back to square one. And so there's an inconsistency there.
And he'd probably revive the Cold War, maybe not so much with Russia, but with China.
Maybe,
he
yeah.
He wants to stir up trouble there and put on sanctions and put on tariffs with China. But my big concern about what's happening in the election is that they do ignore the important issues on purpose. And this election, the danger of this election is a distraction. It's a pretense that they're talking about something important and thinking that they're dealing with it. And I don't think they do at all, because I think the most important issues that drive people are economic issues. And so who are our leading candidates right now? We have you know, Hillary and Sanders, and they talk about the economy, but they want more government, more free stuff, and everything will be okay. And if you're rich, you're automatically a bad person, and therefore we have to tax you more. But the middle class is suffering. But they don't talk about why the middle class is suffering, you know, because of monetary policy. So it's an economic issue. But then you come along and say, well, Trump has a different approach. Well, if you can figure out what his approach is, he's not talking about Austrian economics. He's not talking about getting rid of the Federal Reserve or reining in the Federal Reserve. So I don't see them addressing the subject of. They're addressing the subject of anger, but I don't think they understand the anger. Even the revolutions around the world, usually start with people can't afford food, or the gasoline prices went up too high, and the people finally say, hey, wait, we can't live with this, and then there's a revolt.
And that probably is the appeal of Trump to a lot of middle America who's seen its incomes diminished, shrinking over the years. And he's, I think, the only one speaking to them. He's not, as you point out, offering necessarily solutions, but he's the only one recognizing there's a huge group of people that are getting left behind and are angry, very angry.
I saw an interesting statistic today. that pointed out that the 1%ers are vulnerable, and we attack them when they get rich because of government and the Fed. But if you take a $38,000 income in the United States, it's the highest 1% of the whole world. When you average everybody in, you're in the 1%. If you're $38,000. So if you're a true socialist, you say, well, I'm an international socialist. So we have to redistribute wealth. So we have to take the people who have $38,000 instead of talking about how do you get more production? Why aren't we producing? Why don't we have a large middle class? And why do we have so much government involved? But there's no candidate that represents the position of saying that what we have to do is reduce the size and scope of government. We should cut spending, and it's government debt that is the problem. But have you heard Trump say much about we have to do some radical cuts on anything?
Cut spending. Well, no one wants to hear that. Everyone's hoping to get some more free stuff. Yeah. But you point out the economic problems. We were talking before the show about this interesting article that John Whitehead of Rutherford Institute wrote about, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And he points out, we were going to talk about this 4,500 federal crimes. And how many federal regulations was it?
But he has identified 4,500 federal crimes. I think the Constitution identified 5 or 6, that are really, truly constitutionally federal crimes. But he says there's over 400,000 rules. Now, that's a bit of a burden. I mean, have those rules really helped the consumer? Has it helped the consumer on buying prescription drugs? Or are those rules more likely to protect drug companies' monopolies and make it so that they can gouge us on prescription drugs and they get monopolies protected, from the FDA and all these things? So the regulations, I've always argued, and that the regulations are written by the interests, the special interests. So banking regulations are written by the banking industry, usually by the ones who have the most money to do the lobbying, to write them in favor of the big banks. And drug companies write a lot of the laws there. It's never written by the consumer. And frequently, it isn't the consumer that comes in and begs and pleads for more of these regulations. They might want access or something, but it's so often it's the big companies that want protectionism. But that is not being discussed here. And of course, the approach is although different, they're very similar. One group wants socialism and progressivism, and the other wants a government which is referred to as populism and nationalism and sanctions and tariffs and blame. Who are you going to blame? Sanders blames the 1%. They're too rich. We have to do something. But Trump comes along and he blames Mexico and Mexican citizens and China. Well, yeah, it's involved, but do they look to themselves or ourselves and look at our own policy and what it means to have the reserve currency of the world and how we live beyond our mean and have to borrow all this money? No, they never do this. It's the Chinese. Trump, boy, I'll tell you what, I'll take hold of those Chinese and teach them a lesson. So it's still, they want to be a boss, and libertarians aren't out there to have a boss. So that's why libertarians feel so lonely now is we don't need another boss, and the boss is opposite of liberty.
And even if he might be right about businesses moving to China, one of the reasons they move to China are all these regulations we just talked about. It's easier to open a business in a communist country than it is here in the U.S. Yeah. But one thing that Trump does attack that I have to admit some sympathy, and that's the media. And we were talking about the role of the media in elections before the show, and it's such an important issue.
This condemnation of China, because he wants to bring jobs back and get back in manipulation. But who do these cheap products benefit? It's the poor people. If Trump had his way, the price of goods that poor people can afford now will go up. The same way the intent is, out of fairness and humanitarian instincts, $7 an hour is like slavery, so we have to make it $10 or $15. But look at what's happened to Walmart. Walmart's in trouble. And they raise the wages, and they're going to have to raise prices. They close down some of their stores. People lose jobs. So as bad as Walmart is. They produce low products and give it a lot of jobs, but some do-gooder planner say, well, we have to dictate the price. We can't let the market decide that $7, if somebody voluntarily comes in and works for $7 an hour, and they're working for a company that provides goods to be cheap, and they buy them from China. If people understood liberty, they wouldn't be so upset. But they also, if we had a free market, there wouldn't be such a challenge to the economy. But to blame that there's too much freedom and that's why the economy is so weak and therefore we need more government, that's where the real fallacy is. But it's on both sides, and they both want to be boss. And my vote is for get rid of the boss.
And we talked about the Whitehead article, and his main point was, here are the things that are not going to be decided in this election, and they're really fundamental things. But this is one statistic that really jumped out at me, and I just think it's fascinating. Since 2001, Americans spend $10.5 million an hour, every hour, for military occupations overseas.
Yeah, and which one are you going to vote for, because they're going to reduce the waste in the military-industrial complex?
Think about the destruction of the economy with this money just burning away. What could be used for?
And because they don't talk about the nature of money and how important the monetary system is. Right now, they're getting away with economic murder because we can print, we can borrow, and foreign governments still take this money and they finance things. So it's such a distraction. And they say, well, yeah, Ron, but this monetary thing, it's too complex. People don't understand it. But I think that is very misleading, because I think people understand money. If you talk about, just a clear understanding of what it would be like if you try to start a new country and give the power to a few people in this new society. Well, we want you guys to start printing the money and put a number on there and tell us what it's worth. It's total insanity. And this whole idea, none of them have brought up this idea of the insanity of the Federal Reserve right now and saying, well, we want to stimulate the economy. People have to spend more money, governments have to spend more money, and it's not working so far. Our theories aren't doing so well, but maybe we need more of it. So if low interest rates has helped us in the past to get us out of a recession and businesses start operating again, they don't realize that it comes to an end. So they go 10, 9, 8, 7, all the way. One-time interest rates were 21%, and they have gone steadily down since 1980. Now they're down to 0, and they're talking about, well, maybe you have to be minus. We're going to charge people a penalty to put money in the bank, and on and on. Some of this stuff, the average person is waking up, but if they never hear it from people, from the politicians that are running, but I would think common sense could prevail. One of the nicest compliments that I ever got, campaigning was, when you explain this, it's just common sense, and I think it is. I don't think it's real complicated. If you want to have complicated economics, look at Keynesian economic models and think of the theoretical mathematical formulas that they have to predict human action, which is a total impossibility.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't mind, if you'll indulge me, I wouldn't mind reading the last sentence or two from Whitehead's article, because I thought it was a great summation of this great big Super Tuesday. He said, Americans will have to decide for themselves whether they prefer dangerous freedom to peaceful slavery. One thing is for sure, the reassurance ritual of voting is not going to advance freedom one iota.
Well, that's my sentiment. Maybe that's why he's our friend and we quote him, because we're on the same wavelength, and that's my position on this election. It's not going to make any difference. And if Trump gets in or Hillary gets in, I know nobody wants to believe that, because this ruins all the fun. It ruins the fun of the media. What fun would it be? Oh, they're about the same and nothing is going to change. That's so boring. So they have to dramatize this and draw the lines and have battles between them. And see, Trump Trump is a demagogue, and they all are, and they're tempted to do this. But this whole thing is also, the pot is stirred by the media going running back and forth. Oh, do you know what he said? And back and forth, and it gets people's attention. But it's a distraction from dealing with the real issues, with the truth of things. It distracts from talking about, a non-interventionist foreign policy and why we ought to just get ourselves out of all these countries. It distracts from monetary policy. It distracts from free market economic, and it distracts, unfortunately, from the whole issue of liberty. And so far, there is no evidence that this election is going to result in more liberty for the people. But I'll tell you one thing. If there's any consequence of the stirring of the younger generation that I witnessed, there will be a chance for liberty to be returned, because there's a lot of people still interested, and it will become very obvious to a lot of people soon that, yes, we will be much better off if we live in a free country rather than a totalitarian country, and it's up for grabs right now. But unfortunately, this particular election isn't going to move us in one direction or another. That takes a little bit harder work of people hearing the explanation of why liberty is so far superior to tyranny. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.